Happy Easter. Thank you for celebrating our Lord's resurrection with us here today. The word ordinary is defined as no special quality or interest, unexceptional, run-of-the-mill. Ordinary is normal. There's times in our lives when we want ordinary. We like normal. On the other hand, there may be some things in your life that have become ordinary that you would rather not be ordinary, like your marriage or even your job. And sometimes our habits become ordinary and we wish they hadn't. If ordinary isn't working for us, it can become oppressive. Easter is about the celebration of something extraordinary to save us from the ordinary. When normal wasn't working for the world, when the world was caught up in the same old that led us nowhere, God decided to do something extraordinary that had never been done before. He sent his Son into the world. Jesus lived on this earth for 33 years, living basically an ordinary life. Then around age 30, he went public. He taught like no one had ever taught. He lived like no one had ever lived. And he loved like no one has ever loved. He had insights into life that people had never heard before. He told stories that forced people to challenge their assumptions about God and how life worked. He had an ability to attract people, young and old. He could speak with the educated and the wealthy, as well as those on the margins of society, the poor, the sick, and the outcasts. People who were nothing like Jesus liked him and wanted to be around him because there was something extraordinary about him, something way beyond ordinary. There's no record in the Gospels that Jesus is some kind of milquetoast guy. People met him and walked away healed of their diseases, healed in their hearts, and convinced that he was the Messiah, the Son of God. Many of the religious leaders of the day found him to be a threat to their power, and so they collaborated to kill him. But no one walked away unaffected. And sadly, or happily, this rampant emotion led to his being tortured and crucified. He allowed this. For all practical purposes, he died there on the cross, appearing to be defeated. This experiment in love, crushed by humankind, may have ended up just a footnote in history, except that 3 days later, he rose from the dead and conquered the grave. Easter is about the celebration of this extraordinary event in history, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. If you boil down Christianity to its most basic level, you could say that it's essentially three things. One, it's a belief that Jesus is the Son of God. Two, it's the belief in this event, that Jesus rose from the dead. And third, this is the most relevant thing for us, the third element of Christianity is that because Jesus did, we can. We can also conquer death in all its forms. We can conquer the ordinary trials and tribulations of life through his power. Here's where it becomes real for you and I. Access to his power doesn't come from anything extraordinary. Believing in Jesus and his resurrection most often comes through ordinary circumstances and practices. To help us understand this, we're going to look at the 20th chapter of the Gospel of John, which was our gospel reading this morning. And it says, "On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb." Now, they're looking at how in Judaism they number their days. We know that in Judaism the day begins at sunset. So when Jesus gathered with his apostles in that upper room to celebrate the Last Supper on Thursday evening, that was day one. That there they began with supper. He went to the garden. He prayed. He was betrayed by Judas. He was arrested, put on trial, condemned to death, and crucified and died. All in that one day. And because the day was drawing near on that Friday afternoon, his body was taken down from the cross in haste because the Sabbath was soon to begin. And the Sabbath that year also happened to be the Passover. So that there they took him down in order to have their Sabbath rest. They laid him in a tomb hastily. So when he's in the tomb on that Friday evening, the beginning of day 2, Jesus rests in the tomb. The beginning of Holy Saturday. And then on Saturday evening, when sun goes down, the beginning of day 3. And at some point in the night there, Jesus rose from the dead. Because when Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early on that Sunday morning, the first Easter Sunday morning, the stone had been rolled back and the tomb was empty. She was going there for a very ordinary reason. Because there, when someone died, it was customary that their family or their friends would anoint their body for burial, prepare them to be buried. But they had no time to do that on Friday afternoon. And so she was going there at her very first opportunity when the sun rose on Sunday morning. And so she was going about something extremely ordinary to anoint his body with perfumes, but there she didn't get the chance to anoint him because the stone had been rolled away. The body was gone. She thought it was missing. So Mary probably thought that someone had stolen the body. She runs back to Peter and to the apostles, and we hear John say that both he and Peter ran to the tomb. But John, being kind of a young boy, got there much quicker. He looks in, he sees the cloths there, but he waits for Peter. He had deference for Peter as the leader of the apostles. When Peter goes into the tomb, he goes a little deeper and observes it a little more carefully. He's probably thinking that robbers wouldn't come to the tomb and take the body and leave the linens, to leave the cloths and to leave them folded neatly in the corner. That robbers would come in and steal the linens and leave the body. John takes in this whole scene and he understands that the only explanation can be that Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus had conquered the grave. John too looked at some ordinary things and realized that something extraordinary had happened. As you read through the gospel accounts of Jesus after the resurrection, his appearances, that even though he appears to them many times and they become witnesses to the resurrection, he does so in very ordinary ways. That he shows them the nail prints on his hands and his feet. He eats with them. He walks with them. He talks with them. That Jesus didn't do magic tricks to prove that he was risen. He showed them in very ordinary ways that something extraordinary happened on that first Easter Sunday. That's what Easter is all about. The most extraordinary event in human history has the power to change our ordinary lives through seemingly ordinary methods. Peter, who had denied even knowing Jesus right before his crucifixion, now recognized that he is risen. So there's no using our own failures as excuses for not believing. The disciples were most likely hiding in that upper room, scared to death, afraid that they were going to be the next to be arrested and put to death. They were ordinary guys who went on to do something extraordinary. Because of them, we know the ultimate good news of salvation. That Easter is about the most extraordinary event in human history, and it has the power to change your life. The power of Easter can change ordinary things and people into the extraordinary. If it's become ordinary in your marriage that you don't talk to one another and don't communicate with one another, know that Jesus' resurrection has the power to bring your marriage from death to life. Maybe it's become ordinary that you don't talk to your kids or carry on a real conversation with them. Maybe it's become ordinary to drink more than you want to drink. Maybe ordinary for you to run around incredibly busy all the time and you long to get off the treadmill. Whatever it is, if ordinary isn't working for you anymore, the same extraordinary power that brought Jesus to life is available to you. And that power is available to you through some very ordinary practices. Athletes don't achieve the extraordinary without ordinary practices, done routinely. We Catholics also access the extraordinary power of Jesus through some very ordinary practices. So over the next few weeks during this Easter season, we invite you to join us as we talk about some ordinary practices in our lives that can bring an extraordinary transformation and change in our lives. If your ordinary isn't working, if you want to see some extraordinary results, then I would invite you to join us next week, either here in person or online. And remember, in the meantime, to love one another.